Welcome to the Polygamer podcast, where gaming is for everyone. Join us as we expand the boundaries of the gaming community.
Hello and welcome to the Polygamer podcast, episode number 58 for Wednesday, January 11th, 2017. Happy New Year! I am kicking off the new year with this week's episode with writer and storyteller Matt Baume. Hi, Matt.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
Thank you for being had, and Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you.
So you have multiple titles, as many of my guests do. You are the co-creator of the documentary Playing with Pride, currently in development. You are the author of the book Defining Marriage, and the host of the podcast Sewers of Paris. My, you're busy.
Yeah. I'm on top of every little piece of media I've got a finger in.
That's true. Playing with Pride is video, Sewers of Paris is audio, and Defining Marriage is written. You are a master of all trades.
I am. What did they used to call Howard Stern? Master of all media? Queen of all media? No, that might be Perez Hilton.
I'm not sure these are ideal role models to be comparing yourself to.
No, let's set that aside. I'm like none of them.
Let's talk a little bit about what these media are. Defining Marriage is a book that you came out with in 2015, correct? What's that about?
Yeah, so prior to writing that book, I worked on the Prop 8 trial for, about 2 years. And that was the lawsuit to get marriage equality legalized in California. So I was doing communications and making videos, and I was really embedded deeply on that legal effort. And so in that process, I started to meet a lot of people who had just dedicated their lives to fighting for not just civil rights, but for fighting for their own dignity and to protect their own families. And I heard these incredible stories from people. So I started to put them all down into this book that, as it evolved, traced the history of marriage equality from the 1970s up till today. And along the way, I had my own experience with my partner negotiating in the relationship over what our intention for our relationship and how we felt personally about marriage. So as I'm fighting for the rights of, millions of people in California and around the country, I'm having this sort of domestic learning experience as, my partner James and I are figuring out what marriage means to us personally. So I wrote this book, Defining Marriage, and then to go along with it, I have a podcast of the same name, Defining Marriage. It's definingmarriage.com. Where James and I still, the book came out in 2015, and we still, 2017, every week we talk about what's going on with marriage equality and LGBTs and just our own lives and our relationships. And we go off the rails and get distracted frequently, but that seems to be part of the fun. And I guess that's just part of having a relationship, is getting distracted.
So Defining Marriage is an anthology of the people that you interviewed?
Yeah, so there's an anthology, I guess that's a good way to think of it, of people starting, in the 70s, when it was just this impossible dream that anyone would ever allow queer people to get married. And there were just a few, like these crazy dreamers who, one was a county clerk in Colorado who two guys came in, they said, "We want to get married." And she's like, "I don't see why not." I mean, this was the early 70s, and it threw the country into this panic. So going all the way up from her to, the 1980s, when there were a lot of crises on the minds of the LGBT community. There's a big debate about, is marriage something we even want? Is that too much? Is that assimilating into straight culture? Then to the 90s, when there were successful legal challenges that, were really scrappy and came out of nowhere. But it just started because one woman had an ear infection and needed her partner's health insurance and couldn't get it. And that's how, an ear infection wound up changing law all over the country. Until the, Supreme Court had to step in and overturn marriage bans in 2015. So, and then the common thread that weaves throughout is my own experience, challenging, like why do I want to get married? And what do I do about the fact that my partner doesn't seem to want the same thing, despite at that point we've been together almost 15 years.
Wow, that must be very challenging, not only to set out to create a book like that and discover that you have a lot of your own growth to do along the way, but also discover that you and your partner may not see to eye on something that is very important.
Yeah, it was a real learning experience. And I sometimes wonder where we would be if I hadn't been, in this incredibly unique and bizarre world embedded in that trial and just swimming in what does marriage mean to us every day after day after day.
So tell me about this other project of yours, Sewers of Paris. I assume it's not a podcast about European sanitation.
Not quite, not quite. As much as I would love for that to be the case. So the Sewers of Paris is a podcast where I have a different guest on each week, a different gay man, and we talk about the entertainment that has changed their lives. And they share personal stories about how Madonna or Oscar Wilde, or interestingly, I just had a guy on who talks about Frank Sinatra. I've got another one who talked about The Wizard of Oz comes up a lot. Golden Girls comes up all the time. And the project started because I was in a gay bar and I was talking to a guy from the Czech Republic about, or was it the Czech? Yeah, I think it was the Czech Republic, about Bewitched, the show Bewitched, and the character Endora, who's sort of a queer icon for people who have the strange temperament that they're still interested in sitcoms of the 1960s. So he had never heard of this character. And then he started telling me about Christopher Isherwood, an author who I knew very little about. And I realized, we're having really similar experiences in our lives, but we're mediating them through these very different cultural influences. And, I may be obsessed with, for example, Angela Lansbury. He's obsessed with Harvey Fierstein. And, but these are common touchstones that a lot of gay men have, and they're a way for us to understand each other, even at a time when it's difficult for us to use words to talk about who we are, either because we're closeted to ourselves or we have to be closeted for our own safety, or we just haven't come to terms with the strange life of the gay man. So I started doing this podcast where every week I have somebody on and I ask them, what's the entertainment that changed your life? And the people share these really surprising stories about how books and movies and TV and shows and plays. And I had someone on to talk about opera recently. They share these really surprising stories about how media intersected with their lives and made them better people.
Why is it that you interview only gay men?
Well, that's a good question. It's something that I thought a lot about. So I wanted to focus it very narrowly on a particular experience. There are a couple of reasons that I focus it just on gay men. One is that this is the world of the gay man, and I use that term in air quotes because obviously everyone's experience is different and there's not like one world of the gay man. But there are a lot of common shared experiences that gay men have and a lot of stories that resonate similarly with people from very different backgrounds. And that's something that's very particular in our culture, and I think in most cultures, to men who and I've been kind of loose on gay, and so I've had queer men on. I've had bisexual people on. I haven't had any trans people on yet, but I would love to. Anyway, so I wanted to focus very narrowly on this one particular experience of what is a lot of the questions that people face are, what does masculinity mean, and how do I define what it is to be a man in our culture that places very particular expectations on men. And I also wanted to avoid the risk of being a mansplainer, essentially. The queer women's experience is not something I have any personal experience or really any expertise in. So, I felt like it really was not my story to tell. I would love for someone to have a podcast where they talk about the entertainment that affected the lives of queer women. I would love to hear about that because it's something I'm really eager to learn about. But I focused mine on my area of expertise and essentially on my tribe because that's what I know, and that's a particular experience that I think has a lot of common bonds between the people who have experienced it.
And why is it called Sewers of Paris?
Oh, yes. So that name. Well, for one thing, it certainly sticks with you, doesn't it? For another thing, so it's a reference to a couple things. One is I just personally am actually kind of a fan of sewers. I just think sewers are fascinating. That is not the reason for the show, but it's the reason that it was kind of top of mind for me. I just find water infrastructure really weird and exciting, but that's just me. The real reason is because there was a gay bar in Los Angeles in the 1970s and possibly earlier, it's been hard for me to find out, called the Sewers of Paris. It's such a weird name for a gay bar, but it was right there in the middle of Hollywood. And it was kind of in a time that we would think of as very different, where, gay bars didn't have any windows and you had to be secretive about it and everything was hidden. And I just love the fact that this was the name of it, that at once it is classy and refined, Paris, but then also it's the sewers of Paris. And that's sort of what I strive for on the show, is to surface queer entertainment or queer affiliated entertainment that manages to combine, the glittering lights above the city of lights, but also the dark underbelly. And on the show, we do go below the surface. We go under the surface to really peel back the layers and investigate what is it that makes up the gay experience? What are the things floating around that you might not even be aware of? We sort of shine a light on them. So that's where the name comes from.
Do you find that SEO is an issue for such a podcast?
It is sometimes. Very occasionally, it becomes difficult to filter out traffic from people who are looking for information about sewer tours in Paris. Very seldom does that come up. It seems as though the bleed between those two worlds, between the podcast about gay men sharing entertainment stories and tourists who are going to Paris, it doesn't cause too much of a problem. Every now and then I'll get like a strange search, or I'll get sucked down, because like I said, I do find sewers really interesting. So every now and then I'll be searching for something about my own show, and then I'll be like, oh, look at this really interesting drainage project or something. And I'll just get completely distracted by something. And I'll be like, oh, this is not related to my work at all. I need to pull myself out of this.
I just need to clarify. You're not pulling my leg about your fascination with water engineering?
No, I'm absolutely not. I actually used to write about water quite a lot. I used to live in San Francisco, and they have just to give you, I can talk for a long, long time about sewers. So I'll give you the top line, the interesting bits. One is that San Francisco, when it was essentially colonized by Europeans, because it was already inhabited, they tried to build sewers, and they were terrible at it. They built sewers out of wood, which is a dreadful idea, especially when you've got tides coming in and out. So they all rotted, and it was a disaster. And then eventually San Francisco figured out, oh, hey, wait, if we just drain everything into this one particular point in the bay, then the tide will either wash it out to the ocean or wash it into Oakland. And either way, it's not our problem. So to this day, Oakland still has to deal with San Francisco's sewage washing in. And then the other fascinating thing about San Francisco is that it's actually surrounded by a moat. There's a giant underground moat surrounding the entire city that fills up with sewage when it rains. And so, I mean, you'd never know this, but it's these giant tanks that ring the entire city. And they're there because the city was just dumping all this sewage when it rained. And eventually the EPA was like, no, you can't do this. It was actually the EPA's first enforcement action. No, you can't do this. You can't keep dumping raw sewage into the ocean. So they made them build this giant structure that, to me, it's like one of the wonders of the world that they were able to hide this thing in right under our feet. So anyway, there you go about sewers.
And if somebody wanted to know more about the sanitation of San Francisco, are there any resources you'd like to point them to?
I would recommend that people get in touch with this guy, Joel, who does a walking tour called Think Walks, like walks that you think about. Think Walks, I think it's thinkwalks.org. And he does a really nice tour. This is going to sound crazy, of, among other things, he does a lot of historical tours, but he does a tour of San Francisco's water and sanitation history, which is just fascinating because it's one of those things that you never think about. But if one little thing goes wrong, everybody dies.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Okay, there will be a link to that in the show notes. Let's get to the real reason you're here today, which is your current project that you have in development and which you have been shopping around to various game conventions for the past year, which is the documentary Playing with Pride. What is Playing with Pride?
So we've actually been holding off calling it a documentary because, like so many things that I do, it's sort of a multimedia sort of thing. What we've been calling it is a video project. And so it started a couple of years ago. I'm sure you remember when GamerX was getting started.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so that's the game convention with the queer focus that got started in San Francisco. We lived there at the time. Oh, no, actually, we didn't. We just moved to LA. But anyway, so GamerX was getting started. And, this game convention that was focused on queers was getting going. And we heard all this questioning online, my partner and I, about why is this necessary and why do you have this and you're segregating yourselves and, why do you have to make sexuality a big part of gaming? What does gaming have to do with sexuality? And so there was all this challenge to why GamerX was necessary. And we're like, well, James and I, my partner, we're like, that's a good question. We're both gamers. James is a veteran of the game industry, and I've absorbed a lot of gaming through him via osmosis, and he's really welcomed me into, when we met, we actually met through gaming. It was through Final Fantasy that we met, and he's really opened my eyes to a lot more games because he's just an encyclopedia of game knowledge. So we were really interested in this conference. We're really interested in the questions that people were asking about why are we doing this? And so we decided to ask people. So what we did is we drove around the country. We started in LA and drove up the coast to Seattle, and then we drove across the top of the country through Minneapolis and Chicago. We drove to New York and then into Maine. Then we drove all the way back down through the middle, through Denver, and back to San Francisco just in time for GamerX. And we were asking people, why do you want to go to this? Why are you spending, in some cases, hundreds of dollars to travel across the country and disrupt your whole weekend for this thing? And what started to happen is we were hearing really interesting stories from people about why gay game events, queer game events mattered to them. Stories about coming out and meeting their partners and finding their place in the world, finding their tribe, reconciling with their families. And we're like, there's something deeper going on here than just a queer game convention in San Francisco. There's a really interesting thing that happens when gay culture and game culture collide. People's lives are really transformed when you've got this crossing of queer culture and game culture. Often these two things either don't get along, or people don't expect them to get along, or afraid that they won't get along. And when they're brought together, something really fascinating happens. So we've gathered these interviews, about 130 hours of interviews of people talking about these experiences. And what we've done is taken some of the most interesting stories that they've shared with us. And at a couple of conventions now, we went to PAX and GamerX itself and HavenCon, and we put these together into a little hour-long storytelling show where James and I talk for a little bit. We show some stories from people. We talk a little more. We show some more stories, and people hopefully will come out of it with a better understanding of why do queer game events matter to people through the firsthand stories that people are sharing.
That's a great question. It's actually one of the questions that launched this podcast. Matt Kahn, the founder of GamerX, was the very first guest ever on Polygamer, where I asked him, why do events like GamerX matter?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's something that is important to have an answer to. And my hope is that through this project, people will be better positioned to either understand it or answer that question when it comes up. So we've done this little live show thing at conferences. And then we did a live stream via Twitch and YouTube back in November to share sort of a work in progress with folks online. So we got a lot of people tuned in for that, and we showed the project live online. And people can see that still. We've got it for now. We've got it at playingwithpride.com. We're recording this in January of 2017, and so we've got it up on the front page now. We'll probably take it down to retool maybe in the next month or so. But if folks go now to playingwithpride.com, they can see the live stream that we did back in November. That's about an hour long. And then we're working on finding new ways to present this material, whether it's in a feature documentary or webisodes or a podcast. Part of getting our fingers around all the footage that we've got. And one reason we did the live stream is to find out what form would people like to watch these stories, and how would they like to meet the people that we've interviewed, because we've interviewed over 100 people at this point. So how to, we want to know, like, what stories are resonating with people, and how do they like to spend time with the folks that we've interviewed.
Now, there have been other attempts at answering that question of why events like GamerX matter. For example, the documentary Gaming in Color. How is what you're doing different as far as the content goes?
Yeah, so I do like Gaming with Color. I mean, that's the documentary that a lot of the GamerX folks worked on, and they talked to some really interesting people. One thing that we're doing a little differently is Gaming in Color talk to people who are real insiders in the game community. And so we wanted to broaden that a little bit beyond just folks who are real experts in the industry itself. For sure, we talk to people who work in games. We talk to game journalists. But a lot of the folks that we've spoken to are fans or players. And so we wanted to get these firsthand answers from people about, like, well, what did playing games mean to you? We got some really interesting stories, for example, of how people choose to depict themselves in games. We chose stories about how people have not quite fallen in love, but the interactions and the romances that people have with characters in games. We talked to people who have met through games, or couples who have gotten together and bonded with each other through games. So we've got a broad spectrum of people from fans to streamers to creators to game journalists. And so, that's part of that is just we wanted to understand games are important to people in a lot of ways. And so we're taking a bit broader approach than Gaming in Color did.
Yeah, I have seen a variety of people in your videos that cover a spectrum of demographics in the gaming industry, not only industry insiders, like people I've had on this podcast, for example, like Susan Arndt and Sabriel Maston and Benjamin Williams, but also people I've never heard of, including right in my own backyard in Somerville, Massachusetts. So it's really great both to see familiar faces and cheer them on, but also to discover new stories.
Yeah, it's been a real pleasure, and I love that you had Susan and Ben and Sabriel on. Those folks are great, and it was a real blast interviewing all of them. And yeah, and we've just had so many fascinating stories from people. People have really opened up, and inclusion has been very important to us for this project from the start. It's been really important that we, obviously we're never going to be able to tell the entire gamer experience and the queer gamer experience. But our hope is that, we've been very cautious about making sure that we are, not excluding people and that we are not overlooking people and really giving people an opportunity to tell their story, to basically give them an audience, hopefully, so that they can, have a venue to talk about things that people might not otherwise hear about. For example, I did a video a while back that drew on our interviews about the characters that trans people feel close to. And these are just the trans people that we interviewed. Obviously, this isn't that trans people in general all love these characters, because that's not the case. Everyone's different. But so, for example, we talked to Sabriel, who's a games journalist, about how Princess Peach was important to her. I talked to another woman in Los Angeles named Satine, who felt this deep connection to Bayonetta. We talked to a guy in Bakersfield named Jude, who explained why robot characters are very important to him. He likes to identify with characters like Wheatley or non-human characters like the Khajiit, because he feels like, if gender isn't a part of their story, then it's easier for him to relate to them. So yeah, it's been important for us to surface these stories that people have that are really important to them, and otherwise folks might not be aware of.
I'm curious to know more about that intersection of all these individuals with their identity as gamers. For example, Susan Arndt, who you mentioned you interviewed, she's the co-founder of Take This, which is a nonprofit that addresses mental health issues in the gaming community, because she feels that that's a unique intersection, that mental health has unique challenges and opportunities in the gaming space. And so Playing with Pride does something similar, but with gay culture in the gaming space. What is unique about being gay and being a gamer?
Oh, that's such a great question. And, like I said, the whole project is sort of framed around the transformation that occurs in people's lives when gay culture and game culture come into contact. And there are a lot of things that make gay culture and game culture that intersection is sort of a unique experience. Something that we heard from just about everybody, a real common thread, was that particularly when they were kids, but throughout their lives, when they're in games, that games are a way for them to connect with other people. For example, we've got a story from Susan Arendt, who talks about how games helped her. Her dad helped her play, I think it was Asteroids, and gave her this great lesson about, it's just a game, and she was worried about the high score, and he's like, it's just a game, just have fun. It was an important moment for her. We've got stories about this woman Jolene in Las Vegas, who was never really a gamer until her son was like, I want to play World of Warcraft, and she's like, oh, I suppose I should check this game out, and then she just, like, the whole family became a gaming family after that. So for a lot of folks, games are how they connect with people and bond with people. In the same way, for other people, it's, macrame, or for some people, it's sports. Games do that for people. But with queer people, often what they find is there's a point where their queerness starts to set them apart, particularly in games, in this world that used to be their point of connection. We spoke to DJ Kirkland. He's an artist and a streamer in San Francisco, and he puts it really succinctly. He says that when he was growing up, he got to this point where he was feeling like he could either be black or gay or a nerd, but he had to choose. In fact, when we talked to Ben Williams, he talks about how he felt at home with gamers, but then the more time that he spent with them, the more he saw, that's not really for me, because all the romances are straight, and there's also, as we're aware, gaming and many other venues can have a harassment problem that makes people very uncomfortable. We've got one character that comes up all the time is Tara Branford from Final Fantasy. People talk about how she's this character that straddles two worlds, and she doesn't know if the world of order and the world of chaos, and what am I? Do I belong in the gay world or do I belong in the gamer world? And it feels to a lot of people like they have to choose. And so that really throws a lot of people into chaos, that they're like, oh, yay, games, this is my way to make friends and connect. And, oh, wait, I don't belong here. And so, I think that's something that's really unique to the queer gamer experience, that needing to find your community, but also feeling like, oh, because I have two communities, maybe I don't have any community. And that sounds very glum and depressing. But the good news is that what we found is a lot of queer people are able through games to actually find their tribe. That it's, at first it's a way for people to understand themselves better. We've got a ton of great stories about people understanding themselves better through games. And then it's a great way for people to help each other by forming networks and supporting each other. And then, finally, we also discovered that for creators, it's important. They're paying a lot of attention to queer communities now. Increasingly, game creators are looking at what queer audiences want and asking how they can accommodate those audiences so more people can play.
It was true what Benjamin said about a lot of video game media being focused at stray audiences, and that unfortunately is something that does seem unique to the gaming culture, which is that in books, TV shows, movies, you can find not a majority, unfortunately, but a variety of stories about gay culture or aimed at gay culture, and that seems to be something that the video game industry is still catching up to. The majority of the media is still where movies were 20 or 30 years ago. Maybe that's because gaming is such a new medium compared to movies, but it seems like we still have a lot of catching up to do in order to be more inclusive or just to offer more variety.
Yeah, I think that's correct. I talk to a lot of people about queer entertainment, so I've looked at it with a magnifying glass from just about every angle on Sewers of Paris. And I would agree that the game industry depictions are lagging a bit behind mainstream depictions. And I wonder if part of that might just be the pace of game development and the expense of AAA development. But I will also say that based on our conversations with creators, I think it's improving a lot faster. I mean, it took, the 80s and the 90s and the 2000s for TV audiences to be comfortable with queer characters on TV. You'd see every now and then. I actually did a video on YouTube, on my YouTube channel, about this, about how queer people were depicted on sitcoms. And so, going back to like the 60s on MASH, you'd have, there's this very furtive thing of, there's a queer character on one episode and it was a terrible secret and it was a huge problem, which, it would have been at that time. And then moving ahead to All in the Family had a queer character and Soap had a queer character, but that was very controversial. Then it took them to the 80s and Cheers had a gay episode where they're terrified that Cheers is turning into a gay bar and there's a gay panic amongst all the patrons. And then we get to Golden Girls, which had a more compassionate take on gays, but still it was a very foreign concept. And then Ellen comes out. I mean, I don't know if you remember what like a show-stopping thing it was for the country that we have a gay character on a sitcom and it's her show. It's a regular. So, I mean, literally it took decades for us to get comfortable with gay characters on TV. In games, I think it's moving at like a lightning pace. We haven't interviewed yet, but I've spoken to Adrian Shaw, who's a academic with a focus on queer stories and on games, about where games were. But back in the 80s, there were a few games here and there where there might be a gay romance kind of hidden away, in a way that seemed almost like it might be a bug, but probably wasn't. And that, you've got Leisure Suit Larry, which had gay characters and not always the most flattering depiction. But just in like the last decade or so, there's been a big improvement. And I'll say that, it's hard to make a video project about LGBTs and games without it kind of turning into the story of BioWare, because they've just done so much tremendous work. One of my favorite stories that we've gathered, and it actually came together over the course of multiple interviews. It was just fascinating to see the story unravel. It's not unravel, but reveal itself is the story of Krem. I'm sure everyone, your listeners are familiar with Krem, the character that we could describe as trans, although that word isn't used in the game. Character in Inquisition. So I mean, Krem is just groundbreaking. So we spoke to this person in Vancouver named Justin Saint, and he talked about. He shared a number of really great stories. One was about realizing that he was perhaps genderqueer, gender fluid, when he had a Pokemon save corrupted and the gender of his character was changed to female. And as a child, this happened to him, and he was like, "Oh, I kind of like this more than I am supposed to." And that one little thing sent him off on this sort of journey of like, how do I gender? But anyway, he also shared a story about how way back at a previous PAX, there was a BioWare panel where folks from BioWare were, asking, "What do you want from us? What can we do better?" And people were getting up and talking about what they liked about the game, what they didn't, and there was a person who got up to the microphone and said that they want to see a trans person who wasn't. Or they actually said, "I want to see someone like me in a game who isn't a monster," and that was a really moving moment. And then Justin got up and he talked about how there had been opportunities for trans characters previously, and he felt let down by them in previous Dragon Ages. And he said he just wanted to see someone like him who was in a position of power, someone who could be respected. And so afterwards, everyone got together. So that was Justin's story. And then separately, we talked to some folks from BioWare, and they said that after that panel, they remembered those comments, and they got together at a bar, and they were like, "Okay, we're in a position to do this. We could make this happen. We can respond to these people." And that's how they got started brainstorming. How do we make this character real? And how do we give our audience what they want to say? How do we give them themselves in the game? And there was a lot of trial and error and a lot of mistakes. They brought in consultants to, ask them, "Is this respectful?" And the consultants were like, "Oh, no, don't do that." Or, "Oh, yes, that's working quite well." There was one point where Crumb was actually outed by another character as trans, and somebody was like, "Ooh, that's really not great. So maybe don't have that happen." And so over the course of these iterations and conversations, eventually that was what gave birth to the fabulous character of Krem. And so Justin had this moment where we were showing our video at PAX, this past PAX in I want to say in August, I think, or maybe early September. He saw the BioWare people talk about the feedback that they got, and he had a moment where he realized, "Oh my God, I said that I wanted something like that, and there I am seeing them say that they were able to provide that because of the feedback they got from fans." I mean, it's such a beautiful example of how games bring people together into a community, because Justin is an important part of the game community in Vancouver. He, has organized meetups, and he's part of this queer gaming events. So how queer gamers form communities, find each other, and then start speaking out about what they want, then creators hear that and they're like, "Oh, okay, because you've got this voice now, we're going to listen and not completely do a 180 and just only listen to you, but we're going to include you so more people can play." That means more queer content in games, and that means more queer people will see themselves and feel empowered to reach out and look for others and form communities and make more noise. And so we're seeing this wonderful virtuous cycle. And I think that's one reason why it's changing, why the game industry is changing so fast and getting better so fast and getting more inclusive so fast. And to be sure, there's still mistakes and there's still missteps. But I think the willingness of game devs to listen has been really revolutionary, and it's something that we haven't seen in other entertainment media. So I think it's something that everyone can be real proud of and feel really good about.
It's so encouraging to hear that games are evolving like that, and that future generations of gamers won't see the dearth of diversity that we may have had growing up. Your guests on Sewers of Paris didn't have that diversity. Do they ever cite video games as being what led them down their path?
Oh, yeah, all the time. We do talk about games a lot on Sewers of Paris. I have an interview with this guy, Tyler, who was very shy growing up in a very religious home and had a lot of baggage in figuring out about sexuality to do. And something that really helped him was, he was kind of, the stereotype of like the loner, shy kid who just keeps to himself in the basement, played video games. Well, that stereotype is sometimes true, not always, sometimes. And for him, it was. So he kept to himself. But the more he got into games and eventually found other people who also, formed his game community, something he got really into was cosplay. And so he started cosplaying as anime characters and as game characters, and he realized, oh, this is a place where I can really shine. And I mean, he was great at making his own costumes. So he and his friends just started going to conventions. And it was, for one thing, a great way for him to make friends and a great icebreaker, which I think games are unrivaled in their ability to be an icebreaker. We spoke to so many people for whom, games were their gateway into making friends and forming lifelong bonds. So he was able to go to conventions, make friends. He was also able to really come out of his shell and learn to love being the center of attention. And now he does, a lot more cosplay. He has a YouTube channel called What's the Safe Word, where he and a friend talk about sexuality. He's become very open about talking about sexuality. And he's really turned into a media figure and a role model for nerdy, and he also talks about kink a lot. So he's kind of turned into a role model for nerdy, kinky, queer people, which is, it's a real nice thing. And game cosplay is what helped get him there. For other folks, it hasn't just been about video games. For a lot of folks, it's been about board games. We spoke to a guy named Ray. We spoke to a guy named Ray, who realized that he was getting older. He turned 50, and he said that he woke up one day and he's like, he didn't know who to call to just go to a movie. And he's like, this has got to change. He made some turning 50 resolutions. And one of them was, he said, to find his fucking tribe. He was like, where are my gays? I don't have any gay friends. And he just felt isolated. So what he did is he joined 2 local board gaming groups. And he said he walked into one of them for the first time as a newcomer. And he knew within 5 minutes that he had made friends that were going to last for the rest of his life. There was just a spark, like something, a light bulb switched on. And he was like, these people are going to change my life. And he was right. This was years ago. And now he hosts a Thanksgiving at his house every year with, all these people coming together over to his house, people that he just didn't know a few years ago, but, they're like family. This is in LA. LA has this really great business called Game House. It's just it's a gaming parlor. You go, it's a coffee shop with, literally hundreds of board games, all over tabletop games, all over the walls. And you just, you pay a certain amount per hour, I think, and you take them down and you just play. And for him, even though there's very little queer content in tabletop games, it happens, especially in games where you can make your own narrative. And having a circle where it was comfortable, where people were comfortable creating queer content, just having queer conversations, making jokes about gay stuff. It's been really life-changing for him.
So you're interviewing all these people who have had life-changing experiences through games, and I'm wondering, when you were putting together Defining Marriage, you were doing something similar, except it unexpectedly became a quest of self-discovery as well for you. What are you learning by putting together Playing with Pride?
Oh, that's such an interesting question. I mean, for sure, I've learned more about obscure queer game characters than I ever thought. I'm also learning a lot about games that I just have never played. Fable passed me by, and a lot of people cited Fable as important to them. Fable has some same-sex romances in there, and also Mass Effect. I've played a lot of Dragon Age, but I haven't played any Mass Effect. And we have this really lovely moment with someone here in Seattle, where I'm based. We talked to this guy, Ian, who was saying of Commander Shepard, that Commander Shepard, who you can play in later Mass Effects, can play as as queer. He said, I could be the gay hero I always wanted to be. And I mean, that really gets you. And I had never played Mass Effect, and suddenly I feel like, oh, I totally get this game and why people want to play it. Like I physically felt like this pang of, I understand when Ian said that. As far as myself, one thing it's done for me is it's talking to these people has changed what I'm looking for in a game, because prior to doing this, I was a much more, I wouldn't say exactly casual gamer, but maybe that is a fair way to describe it. I was very into Mario Kart, for example, and I really had not, in Minecraft, but I had not done what you would think of as more, like hardcore gaming. I hadn't played Inquisition, for example, when we started doing this. And I should also mention that a lot of our interviews are from 2 years ago. So a lot of our interviews are actually pre-Inquisition, which means they're pre-Creme, and they're definitely pre-Overwatch. And when Overwatch came out, suddenly our interviews became all about Overwatch. So it's, for one thing, it's just been a great way for me to learn about games that I would never otherwise play. But I think I fell into the same, maybe not trap, but the same assumption that a lot of people did, which is just, games aren't for me. Games aren't going to have me in them, and there's no point even looking for me in a game. And hearing about the successes that people have had of seeing themselves, finding their tribe, and expressing themselves, in games like, for example, City of Heroes and City of Villains. We talked to a guy who's like, sometimes it was better than real life because he could express himself and be free, and he could have a queer character in that game. Rest in peace, City of Heroes. We've got a Fallout, for example. We talked to Jim Sterling, the podcaster and writer and video guy, and Jim Sterling talks about how shocked he was to see a poly character in Fallout, and he said it made him realize, because he generally can pass for just a your plain old heterosexual person, which he doesn't consider himself. In our interview, he said that he considers himself not straight, that he doesn't have a great label for himself, a specific label for himself, but he considers himself not straight. And seeing poly depicted positively in a game shocked him to see his life there, and it really helped him understand himself. Oh, and for goodness sake, Gone Home. I mean, I can't tell you how many people have brought up Gone Home. And we spoke to Andrea, who's a great Twitch streamer, and she talked about how she's straight, and she talked about how her sister, who was queer and passed away, when Andrea played Gone Home, it really helped her understand her sister and her sister's relationships. And in talking to those people, the effect that it's had on me is it's made me say, oh man, not only do I want to play these games, but I'm eager to have experiences like yours. Not, everyone's experience is going to be different. I'm not going to copy them, but there's a place for me. I think humans are wired to want to find our tribe, from, going back to the days when we're just a bunch of primates in trees, covered in fur. I think that something is programmed into us about finding our people and finding our tribe and finding a place where we're accepted and where we can support each other. And, that's something that for me was missing from games. We talked to Tony, who's one of the organizers, Tony Roca of GamerX, and she said that there came a point in her adolescence where games were all about, shooting and army guys and scruffy beards. And she was like, well, I guess I'm just not a gamer. And I mean, the fact that Tony, who's, intensely a gamer, would think that because she perceived that games just didn't include her. I mean, that's both really sad and really angering to me. And it's been such a pleasure to see everyone have really moving personal experiences through the games, to realize that those are available to me. And since doing this, doing these interviews, I've started to play Inquisition. I romanced Bull, which was, a pivotal moment in my life. Romancing Bull is an experience I will never forget, which sounds real silly to say because he doesn't even exist in reality. But hey, there it is. Gone Home it's been a moving experience for me, even after knowing all the details and twists of Gone Home. I mean, I probably played that through multiple times now. I've played that at least 3 times. Yeah. So finding these stories has really changed the way that I play and the potential that I see in games. And just, I love getting stories from people. I love helping people open up and tell the story of their life and make sense of, who they were, who they are now, who they want to be. I mean, it feels great to hear those stories and also to share them. I love the process that we're going through now of figuring out how we're going to share these stories with people, whether it's at a live thing at a conference. If people go to playingwithpride.com, we've got the video up there right now in January of 2017 where people can watch our live stream. And you can also sign up for our mailing list. We've got a mailing list of Playing with Pride where folks can learn more about the project. And we send out little email updates about it so folks can find out when it's going to appear either as a podcast or as a video or little webisodes or whatever it's going to be. So yeah, that's how it's affected me.
This love for sharing stories seems to be the connective tissue that runs through all your media, whether it's writing the book Defining Marriage, the podcast Tours of Paris, the video project Playing with Pride. That does seem to be the common theme among them all, is that you're not necessarily writing from your own experience. You're not putting yourself on a pedestal. You are creating a platform for other people's voices, and you're amplifying and sharing those stories. And I think that's wonderful because I have the same fascination. That is why every podcast I've ever done, Polygamer, Indiecider, Open Apple, they are all interview based. It's all about getting people's stories told. And it's the same reason why I go to the Moth every month and I listen to it on NPR. It's just I think people's stories are fascinating. And even in this age of social media, Twitter and Facebook, people still lead lives of quiet desperation and they just want somebody to listen to them. And I think it's great that you're doing that.
Well, it's really nice of you to say. I'm so glad that to hear you note that storytelling is the common thread, because that's definitely how I feel as well. And I'm delighted by the work that you're doing to get people to share their stories. And it's really lovely to hear the Moth brought up, because I mean that's if folks aren't familiar, it's a storytelling series where people just get up at a microphone and tell a story for a little while, and they're just regular folks. Everyone has so many. I'm not going to say everyone, because maybe somewhere there's somebody out there who's just never experienced a story. But I think everyone has some stories banging around inside of them, and we may not. It's hard to look at yourself and understand yourself, but from the outside, it's so rewarding to listen to somebody and help them understand, what got them to where they are, and to ask questions and learn about people. I mean, and I'm sure you must find this as well, like in your process. Like, do you find when you're interviewing people that, it's just the process of asking questions is a good way to get to know them?
It's not only a good way to get to know them, but it's also a good way to get to know myself, because sometimes I am challenged by their answers and I'm just stumped and stymied about, oh, I never thought of that. That never occurred to me. I can't believe that happened to you. And then I have to go back and rethink what I thought I already knew.
Yeah, something I do on Sewers of Paris is I recommend a piece of media at the end of every episode. So, I just interviewed somebody about Frank Sinatra, and so at the end of the episode, I recommended that people look up. There's this fascinating letter that Frank Sinatra wrote to George Michael back in 1990. George Michael had just done an interview where he laments the pressures of celebrity, and there's so much pressure when people are scrutinizing you. And so Frank Sinatra wrote him this letter where he's like, what are you complaining about? Everybody wants, everybody has dreams to achieve what you've achieved. And you need to embrace the celebrity. You've been given a talent. You need to share it. And, on one hand, I've read that article or that letter, and I thought, oh, that's really inspiring. Talent must be shared, Frank Sinatra wrote. But also that sort of made me examine a couple things about myself, as my own tendency to, to my perfectionism of like, oh, it's got to be perfect. It's got to be perfect before I share something. Well, sometimes it's just nice to share it and see what people say. And also, I think there's something important to note there where, it's very easy for Frank Sinatra, a straight, cis, white guy, to say, yeah, go ahead and invite scrutiny and let people into your life and be public. George writing that to George Michael, who's at the time, I'm pretty sure George Michael was closeted in 1990. It makes you realize, it's just a little reminder of the pressures that marginalized people are under that might not be visible to straight people or to majority people, to people who have privilege. And so, just going through that and reading that article and thinking about it, reading that letter and thinking about it, has just reminded me of, sometimes people just don't understand each other's stories all the time. And you got to remind them, oh, well, you may have some assumptions about what it's like, but let me share with you what it's actually like. Because, I have no doubt that Frank Sinatra was told, oh, George Michael's gay, and so he has special, there are other concerns that you might not be aware of. I'd like to think that Frank Sinatra would be compassionate. He was an emotional guy. He seemed to have a lot of empathy. So anyway, we're getting off the beaten path here. I want to talk about Frank Sinatra, but having these experiences, listening to somebody talk about this stuff, and going out and experiencing media, whether it's a game or something written or a performance, live performance, whatever it is, that active connection with people really helps you understand them and helps you understand you.
And the goal of Playing with Pride is to connect people who are asking the question, why do gay gaming conventions need to exist, with the people who have the answer. But I'm curious, I fear and suspect that a lot of people who are asking the question, why do gay gaming conventions need to exist, are asking that question rhetorically. Like they already know the answer is that it's a silly idea, we don't need this stuff. Do you think that documentaries like Gaming with Color or video projects such as yourself are actually answering that question to people who are sincerely asking it. Certainly, it does serve the benefit of letting gay people know that they're not alone, which is very important, is that sharing these stories let you know that other people have the same stories you do or similar experiences. But are we actually reaching our target audience, or are we just preaching to the choir?
That is such a good question, and it's something that, yeah, we're very much aware of. And I think there's a couple answers. One is that there are people who just cannot be reached because they don't want to be. I would put them at the, I think they're far, if we were to paint a bar graph or a spectrum or something, they're just folks that it's not a great use of time to try to reach those people, which is sad for now, but I mean, it's just how it's always going to be. That having been said, I think the majority of people are, I want to believe that most people are good. They may not be as informed as they could be, but most people want everyone to have a good time and to play and to have a successful gaming experience. And so that's a very long-winded way to respond. But, I would point to one of the stories that we heard, one of the stories that we documented was from Laura Kate Dale, or AKA Laura Buzz. And so we talked to her at the last GamerX, and she shared this story about how when she was younger and not sure how she wanted to present gender-wise, she was playing World of Warcraft, and she was presenting in-game as female and presenting in real life as male. And eventually that caused a bit of a crisis in the game when other players were like, why won't you ever Skype with us? And she was just terrified that her voice would give her away, and that they would reject her for being trans because, that's a story that she'd heard. And that caused this huge conflict with other people in the guild when they began to learn more about her and they felt betrayed. And, poor Laura just legitimately did not know what she wanted from herself. She didn't know how she wanted to identify at the time. Well, fast forward ahead a couple of years, and so Laura's got a very public persona online now. She does the site Let's Play Video Games, which is lovely. In addition to many other things, she works with Jim Sterling a lot and has a ton of podcasts and video projects. And so she had this fundraiser for some surgery that had come up for her, and all these strangers are suddenly chipping in, and people are helping her achieve this important milestone in her life. And, she had gone from people rejecting her in the game, and essentially, branding her a betrayer for not being more honest about her sexuality when she didn't even know. And, and she got to this point where, strangers who probably had never thought about, a lot of them had probably never thought about trans anything in their lives, were giving her money for her, for her personal life. And the reason I bring that up is because something she observed about that is one, that she had resolved not to keep that aspect of her life secret, which I think is a real brave thing to do and a wonderful thing to be able to do if you're lucky enough to be able to do that safely. But also, in talking about games, she's just having a conversation most of the time about what game she's playing and what she likes and what she don't, what's coming out from Sony, what's coming out from Nintendo. She's got a wonderful podcast where she just talks about gaming butts. It's just fun and silly, and she talks about the butts of different video game characters. And she said that in talking about having a good time and games and having fun, stuff that people can really relate to, whether they're queer or not, or they don't know if they're queer, that provides people with a way to get to know each other and feel close. And then, she can mention incidentally, or sometimes queerness will come up. And then people who would never have thought about this or never thought that it was their business to think about this, suddenly they can care and they understand why they should care. And what a great way to reach people and make new friends and to, broaden horizons of folks. So, I think in talking about gaming, there's an opportunity to build some bridges there between, I talk about the collision of when gay culture and game culture collide. And sure, they collide. This is going to be a really strange metaphor, so get ready. They can collide, and then when they pull apart, there's sort of a sticky bridge that's formed between them where you can walk between those two things. That is a disgusting metaphor, and not at all the image that I wanted to leave you with. But, I mean, you get what I'm saying, right? That sometimes they butt up against each other and there's a collision, and sometimes there's a bridge that's built between them. And I think that's something that's possible to do when people tell their stories. And then, another answer to that is also that our hope, hopefully, is that even if we don't reach people who need an answer to why do gay game events matter, that we reach people who can reach them. One of the wonderful magical things about being queer is that we're everywhere. We're in every family, we're in every workplace, we're at every school. Wherever you go, there are queer people. And the same can be said of gamers. Gamers and queers share a lot. And so, even if we're not reaching somebody who doesn't understand why Gamer X or something like it matters, we can reach their coworker, we can reach their brother, we can reach their teacher, and help that conversation get started in other venues. We've spoken to a lot of people who are social organizers, and a big part of the documentary project, the video project, has been talking to folks, for example, in Minneapolis and in Phoenix and in Boston about how they find each other in real life and how they throw regular events and how they're social, and what they do to foster community. And I just have to laugh at the stereotype of the loner gamer in the basement, because for sure there are those people. But I mean, what could be more social than what has more potential to be social than gaming? I mean, we've spoken to so many people for whom it's a family thing, it's a friend thing, it's a thing you do with your partner or partners. And so, this is a long-winded answer that just to say that community is an integral part of the queer experience, and it's an integral part of the gaming experience. And people can opt out of it if they want, and that's fine. You don't have to be, a social butterfly all the time. But it's there when you need it. And that social thing, that social element, whether it's queer or gamer or both, is how people connect and get to understand each other better.
We've seen in the past couple of years, unfortunately, how toxic social media especially can be when it intersects with the gaming community. But as Susan said, in Playing with Pride, the gaming community can also be incredibly caring and compassionate and thoughtful. And I am encouraged to hear that media like Playing with Pride and creators such as yourself and James are helping to foster that aspect of gaming. I hope we get to see more of that in the years to come.
Oh, yeah, me too. We talked to Dylan Zahner, who's a streamer. He used to go by 8-Bit Homo. I think now he just goes by 8-Bit Dylan. And he talks about how, he saw harassment happening on Twitch, and he just had a breaking point. And he's like, no, I need to do something about this. And so he just started his channel. I mean, he was just some guy. I mean, he was not famous. He did not have a following. He just started streaming. And because his stream was supportive and friendly and welcoming and inclusive, he's turned into a real Twitch celebrity. And same thing with Sabriel, who you had on the show. She has a wonderful story about going to PAX East. And she was on a panel where she talked about being a woman in the game industry. And she got to a point where she had to ask herself, am I about to re-out myself as trans in this panel? Which is, a scary thing that I can't even imagine having to deal with that question. And so she did. She had to gather herself up, and it was emotional for her. And she, her voice cracked a little bit. And then this whole audience at PAX, and I mean, this is not a queer specific audience. This is PAX is as mainstream and hardcore gamer as you can get. It's not really, but it is a hardcore mainstream gamer audience. Everyone erupts into cheers and applause for her, and support, and people come up to her afterwards and talk about it. And she went into this wondering, do I have a place here? Do I belong at this? And she came out of it knowing that she did. I mean, that's wonderful. Susan talks about how gamers can have a fellowship, and not just because we all played Hitman, but because we know what it's like to be outsiders. And we know what it's like to be the nerd. We know what it's like to be the geek or the dweeb, and we know how good it feels when we support each other. We talked to another guy here named Charlie who, talks about being double closeted, that, you're a subculture within a subculture in gaming, and you're a subculture within a subculture in the queer world. And, a lot of people have embraced it. Charlie, for example, started a giant party here called Pink Party Prime that happens around PAX. And that just literally started as a bunch of friends getting together to play Rock Band somewhere. And I mean, it was like a dozen people its first year. And now it is hundreds of people. It's huge. And when, it's just a great reminder that open yourself up and you say like, hey guys, let's have fun. Yeah, there's going to be people who are like, no, I don't like that. You're not like me. But the overwhelming majority are going to be like, fun. I like fun. Fun is great. And I think gamers and gays, queers have a lot of a lot to learn from each other, but also just a lot of familiarity with each other. We've all felt that outcast feeling, and not to get too like group hug kumbaya about it, but there's just something really magical about that moment where you're like, oh yeah, I get you, I understand.
Well, I'm looking forward to seeing Playing with Pride help to connect more people of a variety of walks of life. I know you said that you have a variety of media and distribution formats that you're looking at. Is that going to happen in 2017?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. We've got some great stuff that we're working on right now. Can't wait to show it to people. The best way to connect is to go to playingwithpride.com. We've got a mailing list there where you can sign up to be you'll be the first to know when we've got stuff to show. Also, right now, it's January of 2017 when we're chatting. And for now, we've got a live stream version, the video of our presentation up on the website, so folks can check that out. But we're going to have more coming up soon. So if you go to playingwithpride.com and you don't see anything there will be stuff very soon. So just sign up for the mailing list. And our dispatches are infrequent, so you won't be nagged by us a ton. But hopefully, we'll have a lot more to share. And of course, you can also follow me. I'm at Matt Baume on Twitter, where I talk about this project a lot, but I also talk about my other fun and exciting endeavors. And I should also mention that my partner and I also are Twitch streamers. And so you can find us. We're pretty pixel on Twitch. So James has been playing. James plays just about everything. I'm in awe of James's ability to master various games. I think he was doing, what was he doing? He was doing Darksiders. And we do The Sims every now and then. And I'm working my way for the first time through Dragon Age Origins. I finished Inquisition, and now I'm doing Origins as queerly as I possibly can. I've got a mod that allowed my male dwarf to romance Alistair. And so that's been very exciting to watch, particularly when the game glitches a little bit and suddenly Alistair is very short or my dwarf is very tall.
I love it.
Yeah.
I will definitely have to tune in for that.
Yeah, so that's pretty pixel is the Twitch stream.
And there will be links to all of those in the show notes for this episode found at polygamer.net. Matt, thank you so much for your time. I'm really looking forward to Playing with Pride.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's been a real pleasure to chat with you.
This has been Polygamer, a Gamebits production. Find more episodes, read our blog, or send feedback at polygamer.net.